coming, everybody. Welcome to our third Straight from the Source roundtable. We've been doing this for about 3 months now, so that makes it a trend, I guess. Today's topic is fighting corruption, something that everybody in the community seems pretty passionate about, one way or the other. When I came here to the Post from Miami as an investigative reporter 8 years ago, the prevailing attitude here that I encountered was how corrupt Miami is. And then 2 West Palm Beach commissioners and 4 out of 7 county commissioners here suddenly had the word felon tattooed to their resumes. And suddenly it was hard to argue that Palm Beach County was more chaste than anywhere else. But whether our officials have been duly chastened is another matter. After all, it took a Herculean effort by Citizen Rogel here and other members of our panel and many members of the community to erect the scaffolding for integrity in government, an ethics commission, an office of inspector general, clear and enforceable policies and laws to draw the line. But the battle against corruption has barely ramped up, and there's still a lawsuit out there by 14 cities and towns over how to pay for it. Our Inspector General, Cheryl Steckler, argues convincingly that it's hard to staff up to fight corruption when your budget is uncertain and the community's will to fight is wavering. And quite frankly, hers isn't the only watchdog organization that's had similar troubles. The economy challenges the ability of police, of prosecutors, and even the media to go about what they're supposed to be doing sometimes. And meanwhile, there's this tempting belief by the public that if they're not hearing about big cases out there, then must be that problem's all solved, mission accomplished. So let's ask our distinguished experts, how goes the battle? Have the reforms begun to take hold? What has worked best? Have we overreacted to the point where governing has become more difficult, but no cleaner? What work remains to be done? Let me introduce you here to our distinguished panel. Start with Marty over there. Wave, Marty. Not content to think globally, Marty Rogel has acted locally, doing as much as anyone in the private sector to encourage ethics reform in Palm Beach County. While president of Leadership Palm Beach County, Marty created and chaired an ethics committee to champion reform. The ethics committee identified the need for an Office of Inspector General, an ethics commission, and a new ethics code. The committee worked with the business community and civics groups to encourage the county commission to enact the appropriate ordinances, as well as place the ordinances on the ballot, embedding them in the county charter, and including the municipalities within the county under the jurisdiction of the Inspector General and the Ethics Commission. Marty is a founding principal of Marketing Concepts, a communications and marketing firm. Prior to that, he was one of the architects and the founding executive director of USA for Africa. While there, the organization produced We Are the World, which he'll sing for us later. Mobilized over 7 million people. Yeah, do this way. Mobilized more than 7 million people for its Hands Across America project, raised almost $100 million. Never heard of it. Manuel Farage chairs the county's Commission on Ethics. As a real estate and business lawyer, Manny counsels businesses and individuals in complex transactions, and has served as outside general counsel for a savings and loan association. He has also been an arbitrator for the American Arbitration Association for over 20 years. An AV-rated lawyer, peers rank him at the highest level of professional excellence. Manny has been recognized for his pro bono work and has served in a number of capacities regarding the ethical practice of law, including chair of the 4th District Court of Appeal Judicial Nominating Commission, president of the Palm Beach County Bar Association, and he has served as an expert witness for the Florida Bar in lawyer disciplinary matters. Cheryl Steckler is the county's first Inspector General. The Office of Inspector General opened in June 2010 and has jurisdiction over all elected and appointed county and municipal officials and employees, county and municipal agencies, contractors, their subcontractors, and lower tier subcontractors, not to mention such organizations as the Solid Waste Authority, Health Care District, and the Children's Services Council. Cheryl has worked in law enforcement and criminal justice related positions for over 27 years. Prior to her arrival in Palm Beach, she was the Inspector General for the State of Florida Department of Children and Families for just under 8 years. She is currently an executive board member for the National Association of Inspectors General and is a former president for the Florida chapter of the Association of Inspectors General. Richard Radcliffe is the executive director and past president of Palm Beach County League of Cities. It's a not-for-profit that works for the betterment of the county's 38 municipalities, upon whom our ethics reforms have been imposed. Richard comes from a political and real estate background, having been elected for 23 years to the Green Acres City Council, 3 terms as deputy mayor, and maintaining a real estate brokerage for 25 years. He has served on the board of on the board of directors of the Florida and National Leagues of Cities. He also was president of the Gold Coast League of Cities, which represents Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. And just to set some ground rules for tonight, we hope to make this an informal conversation, so panelists don't wait for prompting, just jump in at any point. Anyone in the audience, though, with questions, I hope you'll have a lot of them. Just jot them down on the cards we've distributed and pass them forward at some point, and I'll ask our panelists to respond to them later. So, Marty, maybe you could start us off with some context. How did we get to where we are? How did these ethics reforms come about?
Well, as you said, a number of elected officials had the felony tag, and the county was designated as Corruption County. And that was something that basically upset quite a number of people. None of us wanted to live or wants to live in a county that is looked upon nationally, and it was that title was in Time magazine. As Corruption County. So just in terms of self-interest, in terms of how we look at ourselves, and in terms of, Alan Greenspan was a guest at a forum, and he was asked about what the impact of corruption is, and he said, well, don't look for economic development if everybody perceives that this is a corrupt area. So in terms of bringing business in terms of our reputation, it seemed like it was important for us to act. This was not necessarily just, a good government impulse. This was very basic self-interest. Is that who we are, and is that how we want to be perceived? So, and thank you for the title citizen. That really encapsulates what transpired. Leadership Palm Beach County really did take the leadership role. Convened a committee. The committee worked for a number of years trying to figure out what's the best course of action. Came up with what we need was an inspector general, somebody who look at how we're spending our money, an ethics code, and an ethics commission. Which we kind of modeled after Miami-Dade. With all of their issues, they were in fact a good model for those offices and the ethics code. And the process was really one that was heartening. This was an issue that brought together groups that had never worked together before. From the Economic Council, and the Business Forum, Leadership Palm Beach County, the Voters Coalition, Tea Party, 912 Group, we all work together. This is the first time that all of these groups ever work together. They may never ever work together again, but at least on this issue, everybody came together and basically said, yes, these are the important offices, and these need to be put in place. We had been looking to put them on the ballot, go out and collect signatures so that these ordinances would in fact be put into the charter. Simultaneously with our action, the state attorney's office, who found that this citizen activity said, okay, we need to act too, convened a couple of grand juries. Grand juries made the same recommendations. That gave the county commission some great incentives to act, and they did. And they actually started getting angry with us for going out and thinking we were going to get signatures and put something else on the ballot. So we negotiated, and we came up with what turned out to be pretty good ordinances. Were passed by the county and the county commission, and then put on the ballot to embed them in the county charter. So a future commission can't just say, well, ethics is over. We don't need those anymore. That's in the county charter, and they can't do anything about it. And it included the municipalities. So this really has been a great grassroots effort. This has been really thanks to all the citizens in the county who worked on this. 72% of the residents, the voters in Palm Beach County, voted to put those ordinances in the charter. An overwhelming number. There's nothing that doesn't get a third against it. Whenever you put something...
What gets missed here is that it wasn't easy. I mean, to those of us, viewing the county governments and the city governments, what was surprising, I think, was that it was so obvious what was wrong and what needed to be fixed, or that something needed to be fixed. And yet there was a lot of resistance to what you were doing. I don't think the grand jury just, said, oh, we should do this, and then suddenly everything was set in place.
Yes, I mean, there remains resistance. When people are used to doing things a certain way, and it's, the Inspector General asked to sit in procurement meetings, and they say no. Well, things aren't, they're not there yet. But when you think about it, over 5,000 years ago, we got the 10 Commandments. So, and they're still being violated. So, it's not as if, we are overnight or in a couple of years going to change everything. And the other piece, which I think we all need to address, is that we need to also look at the culture. And how do you improve the culture so that it's not an issue of, gee, I'm not going to say anything because that it might hurt me down the road. I'll go along to get along. We need to change that so if people see something, they blow the whistle, and that it's now a question of there's a bottom line of shared values that we all agree on, and as a result of those shared values, we act.
Okay. Now we have two big pieces of the puzzle here. We have the Ethics Commission and the Inspector General. Manny, how does the culture get developed from the point of view of the Ethics Commission? Talk a little bit about the education process.
The primary focus of the Ethics Commission is education and getting folks to conform to the ethics code itself, the ordinance itself. We occupy sort of a middle role between the IG and the state attorney's office. And Marty's absolutely right. I think it was a well set up system in that it's a three-legged stool, as I like to call it, of ethics reform. You have the state attorney at one point, you have the IG, and you have the Ethics Commission. All of us have somewhat different roles. The IG is a pure investigatory body. It issues announcements. It shines a flashlight, I think is the phrase that Inspector General Steckler has used in the past, on waste and fraud and corruption. The state attorney obviously prosecutes waste and fraud and corruption. And we occupy a sort of a middle role between the two. And we have a little bit of both sort of in our DNA. Our goal is to have no ethics violations whatsoever. Toward that end, we've gone into training. We've produced programs and instituted training across the entire county government system. All employees, county and municipal, are now trained in the ethics ordinance itself, and they have to certify that. We also offer advisory opinions where we tell folks, look, you can do this, you can do that, but you can't do this third thing. And we allow people to ask us, is my anticipated conduct going to be okay, or is it not okay? The idea being is that we don't want to be vindictive, we don't want to be punitive. We want to get people to do the right thing in the first instance. And we're giving them an opportunity, an example, and a method by which they can do the right thing. And if any of you have had any conversations with Al Johnson, you know that he's very forthcoming. You can call him up on the phone, and he'll talk to you, and he'll give you an informal opinion. He'll tell you how to proceed, what you may want to do, what you may want to do, and explain the process to you. And we're completely transparent. Everything we do is in the sunshine.
In some regards, it's a good sign that you've been kind of below the radar. There haven't been a lot of huge headlines out of what you do, and yet I understand you folks have been pretty busy. Give us some idea of the numbers of people who brought complaints forward.
We're very busy. The State Ethics Commission issues probably 40 or 50 opinions a year. We've been in operation, running, a little bit more than 2 years, and we've issued about 220. So we're setting the guidelines is what we're doing, the parameters. We're telling folks, look, here are the lines, don't cross the lines. The other function that we have on the Ethics Commission, perhaps not as well known, is that we also have an adjudicatory function. We can prosecute, similar to a code violation, violations of the ethics code itself. And in fact, we've recently had 2 where we actually had trials set, where folks were going to go there in the county commission chambers, and we're going to have a trial, and all of you could have watched it on Channel 20. It would have been very, very exciting. But the point is that what we would have done in that particular situation is actually demonstrate how folks would have violated the ethics code itself. And one of the things that folks don't know about the Ethics Commission and what it does is that our executive director has a very close relationship with the Office of the IG and the Office of the State Attorney. They talk to each other. They talk to each other a lot. And if things aren't in one person's court, they may be in another person's court. So between the 3 of them, between the 3 organizations, the Ethics Commission, the IG, and the State Attorney's Office, there's pretty good coverage across the board of the things that go on.
You folks just issued your first fine?
No, we've had a couple before.
You've had a couple?
Yes,
Okay.
I think we're going to be, I don't know if it's quite public yet, but it will probably be our 4th. And we've had different violations that were treated in different fashions. Again, we're not here to be punitive. If you want punitive, go talk to the state attorney. Okay. He will be more than punitive.
But I saw it, correct me if I'm wrong, I saw it as kind of a progression where first you started with educating the public so that they know where to go and what the rules are. And then I thought maybe we would expect to see a few more, I don't want to say prosecutions, but a few more cases in which people get a slap on the wrist or worse.
You're absolutely right. That is the progression that's happened. Obviously, as any adjudicatory body, we have to be sure that we can prove our case. And that's part of the discussions that we have when what case is presented to us. Can we actually prove a violation of the ethics code? And by virtue of the fact that the fact situations we got were not that great, and there was a question as to whether training and understanding of the ethics ordinance itself was as prevalent as it should have been, you didn't see a lot of prosecutions in the first couple of years of the commission. Had they not both settled, we would have had 2 trials in October. I think, call it what you will, whether we've lost patience with folks or we're getting the hammer out or whatever you want to call it, I think you're going to start to see a lot more enforcement actions by the Ethics Commission of the ethics ordinance itself.
And it's interesting because, and we'll get to this more later, but the ethics questions can be fun posers. It's not always black and white.
A lot of them are really, really complex. One of the more complex ones, as you may have seen or heard, is what constitutes a lobbyist. The lobbyist ordinance here in Palm Beach County, and I'm a lawyer, and I read this stuff day in and day out, and it's still challenging to me. For instance, a person, and I'll give you an example from one of our cases, a person who is dealing with ministerial staff at a landscaping person and the question is whether you move a tree 5 feet out of 500 trees, whether that constitutes lobbying. And under the ordinance, the way it's written, it does. Yet someone who negotiates and lobbies for a multi-million-dollar contract, if that's not their principal function, and they work for their employer themselves, that's not considered lobbying, and that's not a lobbyist. I have a hard time understanding that. So a lot of these questions become very, very complex, but at the end of the day, what we try to do is put them into a fashion where they're easily reachable. And of course, we're doing what we can to get the message out there. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. We're in the process of trying to get our emails out public. That's a little difficult for us because we've got a staff of 5 people total, and our budget is, $470,000 a year. It's very small.
Good segue for Cheryl here. Cheryl, talk about your budget and what you've got going in your office there and how it works.
Well, as you know, we have the county, we have the 38 municipalities. We also picked up Solid Waste Authority, Children's Service Council, and healthcare districts. So in a matter of 6 months of the doors opening in 2010, we went from 1 jurisdiction to 42. That is an enormous amount of responsibility, and different than the ethics where they live and breathe off of the codes and off of one state law. What's different about these offices is, as the chair explained to you all, is that our arm is the efficiency arm. It's the eyes and the ears for the taxpayer on how the government spends its money and how it runs. And as a result of that, we have to look in each government entity at their rules, at their policies, at their procedures, at their codes, at the ordinances, at all state law. So if I go into one city and they do it one way, more than likely, I will tell you, I go in a different city and they do it a different way. And so we literally have to learn 42 government entities. And so it's incredibly complex. And with that, and we won't go into the lawsuit and all that, but we were supposed to be at 40 staff. Right now we're at 26. And that includes, again, 8 of those actually are pretty much running the Children's Service Council, Healthcare District, and Solid Waste. So, minus those, it's a handful of people to watch over a $10 billion operation is really what we're talking about. And our budget, although budgeted for around 3.3 or 3.6 million, we're only at about like 3 million that we've spent. I made a decision at the time that we weren't going to keep hiring because of the lawsuit. The problem is I'm still responsible for 42 entities, and we can't keep going with not enough staff to oversee. But little by little, we're plugging away, and we will get there, and eventually we'll continue on. But the goal is to get at 40 staff for the 42 entities.
Not coming in completely? They're still holding back?
What happened is about a year ago almost, in November, 15 at the time, now 14, Wellington backed out, withdrew from the lawsuit. But basically what happened is once the lawsuit was filed, the clerk of the court made the decision that she was not only going to put that money in that had already been previously paid, but she was not going to bill anymore, including those not suing, so all 38. So pretty much we were chopped at the knees with the funding. The county commission came forward. We were about $400,000 short because we did not have the city money. And the Board of County Commission, by a 7-0 vote, voted to fund us and keep us whole for this past year. We will go through the same episode again this year if this is not resolved. And of course, the courts are very backlogged, and it's a very slow process.
So talk a little bit about the difference between the kinds of cases that you investigate or look into versus those the Ethics Commission does.
Well, I think the easy way to explain it is in our world, we are, again, looking at anything of a policy or rule, anything that's tied to how an employee is supposed to do. The major area where it crosses over, where Alan and Johnson and I spend quite some time on, is when it's a misconduct issue. In the world that they live in, whether it's misconduct of whether they've accepted a gift or whether there's a lobbying issue, they're very focused on where their misconduct is. In our world, we look at the misconduct mainly on the procurement side of the house. Has there been inappropriateness in the setup of a procurement contract? Is there kickbacks going? We'll look at the process and how their role is, the employee's role is, more on the contracting side. And that's where we do a lot of conversation, because that's the area where we all three can tiptoe over each other on the misconduct. But for the most part, we're looking at, we do a lot of, we don't do the criminal investigations, and let me get that out right away. An inspector general has an audit staff and an administrative investigative staff, and we also have a contract oversight staff. We don't do criminal investigations, so you won't see us make the arrest. Why? Because what happens is, when it's an administrative arm, we can't interview someone who potentially did something wrong and then use that testimony to get them prosecuted. Okay, it's a rule called Garrity versus New Jersey. It's a law. But what happens is, when you come to our office and you get interviewed, if you are a potential subject, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is potentially you'll lose your job. So because of that, very critical difference, if we believe we have a criminal violation, we will then immediately get with the state attorney's office. They have a public integrity unit that pretty much we live in each other's offices, and they will take the case from there. And you've seen just the other day, actually, West Palm Beach, that was actually worked through our office. A citizen came forward, happened to see what they thought was actually a county vehicle, turned out to be the City of West Palm's vehicle, where they were selling property of the city into a pawn shop. It was great, and I'll tell you, citizens are reporting like crazy, and so are the business community. It's an amazing thing. But that case was actually, we brought it to the public integrity unit. They coordinated with West Palm Beach Police Department, because they had their own police department. West Palm Beach Police Department did the investigation. We went in and looked at the controls of how did it happen, how do we help them tighten up that control, and it works. The process works, and so we do that a lot of times. So
he has pleaded guilty?
Well, he was just arrested, so
okay.
As the affidavit says, he did confess to taking some of the items.
So that's not
but
considered
it's
just a bonus?
I'm sorry?
It's not considered just a bonus?
No, it's not a bonus. But he did disclose that he got it from West Palm, so, But those are the kind of things we do. Employee theft is actually a very large one that we do. Believe it or not, a lot of those cases come to us. And then we look at, how contracting is done. That is a big area in this town where a lot, over, I think, $1.8 billion across the boundaries is spent on contracts. That's a lot of money. And, the oversight piece is the part. We try to get in the front end a lot to hope, that we don't have hiccups going on later. So lots of times we hope that, with our involvement, there's not as many bid protests. That saves money at the end of the day.
But again, different contracting laws in different towns.
Everything is different. What the biggest lesson I've seen here is, I come from the state where there's a Florida law, 287.057, and this law is very, very specific for state agencies on how to procure. How do you write a request for proposal? How do you write an invitation to bid? When should you use those? So that it's very, very specific, and there are very, very few exemptions on that. It does not address local government. So local government does not have to follow. In most instances, there's a few carve-outs in the state law, but a lot of the contracting law doesn't have to be followed. So as a result, what we see here locally is a lot of waivers, and a lot of, even though they have these rules on the books, there's always this little clause of what we've seen in some of, especially the city's policies, where there's a waiver that basically says the city manager or the council can do whatever. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the issues, that why this pay-to-play attitude, and why we're seeing that it's really, are you really a competitive, open, friendly business community? And when you have these waivers and these abilities to circumvent, really, a fair, competitive process, are you doing due diligence by the taxpayers?
Multi-million-dollar contracts.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me get to Richard here, because Richard, I know that the League of Cities is not involved in the lawsuit that was mentioned. You guys are not against the ethics reforms, but you've been, your cities have been subject to them. So what's that like?
Well, it's made my life very interesting. I have the pleasure of working with both of these people, and actually it's a good thing. I see my role as a little bit different. I have 38 municipalities basically that I represent, and my job is to work as a liaison and to make sure everything is functioning. And everything that Marty said is true. I just see it as this is an opportunity for us. In Palm Beach County, we are at ground zero of ethics and what's growing. and I have kind of a personal bugaboo about the C word when we say C County, because as long as you say it, people are going to believe it. And I think we really need to focus on, we are more ethically progressive county. We have wonderful things going on here that aren't happening anywhere in the country. We agonize over once a month, we meet with the Commission on Ethics, and they deliberate like someone's life depends on it. And they're a very thoughtful group, and we work with them. And Chairman Farage has really taken a leadership role in seeing that because there's been an evolution. This happened overnight. We came up with an ordinance literally overnight. And there are a lot of things that are flawed in the system. Some of the examples he gave. The one thing that happened, Alan Johnson realized there was a big flaw in that he had the mechanism to capture the elected officials and the government employees, but he had no tool to capture lobbyists.
Executive director of the ethics.
Yeah.
Right.
And he had no tool to capture the lobbyists. He could capture the lobbyists in the county, but he couldn't capture any lobbyists in the city. So we got together and with the county Commission on Ethics, and we created a lobbyist registration ordinance. And involuntarily, and we captured everyone else, everyone in Palm Beach County, and they were added to the system. Now there's a mechanism not only to get the person that received the money, but there's a way to get the person who gives the money. And that was done as an operation with the League and the Commission on Ethics and Palm Beach County government. And it was a good thing. This is an evolution that's happening. I see it as a great opportunity. We're going to lead the country. This is a county where we're ethically progressive. And moving forward, as this evolves, like you're saying, every time you go to a city, they're learning something. Every time she goes in, whether it's audit, whether it's purchasing, when they leave, they've learned something. So we're getting healthier as a county a little bit every day. We're getting a little bit healthier, and I think that's what we have to embrace. Now, not that corruption is gone, not that it's going to be removed from us forever, because there's going to be a percentage, 2-3%, that no matter what we do, it's going to happen.
But I'm curious specifically what kinds of resistance you hear sometimes from the municipal officials when they ask you, can you go to the ethics board and ask them if there isn't a way that this rule can be made, more practical? What are the points of resistance? I got an email, we all did actually this afternoon, from County Commissioner Jess Santa Maria. And one of the things that he talked about was resistance from a lot of municipalities. Well, first of all, in the pay matter, how to pay for the Inspector General's office, but also things like how to define the whole issue that we had for a while here, how to define waste, fraud, mismanagement. Are there things like that that are still cropping up that you're hearing from your folks?
Advisory boards?
Yeah. I mean, we have, that's why we have advisory boards. And that's why we have advisory opinions, because we're actually going through this. And we probably are going to have to go back to the ordinance and address some of these things.
To fill you all in, Palm Beach County, as well as municipalities, have several layers of government within themselves. Each unit does. And one of the units that has been used throughout Palm Beach County history and throughout the country are advisory boards. Advise on everything from what's the best contract to have, to landscaping, to architecture, and so forth and so on. And the code is very clear that members of advisory boards are officials under the code, and the ethics code applies to them. And some of the concerns have been from some of the municipalities that you can't have advisory boards that function well when the ethics code is applied to them. Obviously, the ordinance is written in the way the ordinance is written. We don't rewrite the ordinance when we meet once a month. It's written the way it is, and we apply it. And the ordinance says that advisory board members are officials, and the ethics code applies to them. And it's created some interesting discussions. I think one time we had one person who had a business. I won't say the person's name nor the industry or profession. but they wanted to represent people before their very own advisory, his very own advisory board, in which he sat as a professional. And we said, no, you can't do that. You can't represent people, clients, before your very own advisory board. And the response
Even
was,
if you recuse yourself from voting on it.
well, yes, even to take it a step further, you need to recuse yourself from any participation. And the comment was, well, this is going to hurt my business. Well, yeah, that's the point. It is supposed to hurt your business. Now, on the other side of the coin is and I want to make sure folks understand that this is a two-edged sword, and Richard will explain this a bit further, probably more eloquently than I can, but serving in any governmental capacity, in any public service capacity, has its costs and prices. Everything from public disclosure to public scrutiny. Anyone who serves in any public capacity in this day has been called various interesting monikers, names, and we all have, and that's tough. Plus, you also have the question of public disclosure. I think, if I can state, again, not as eloquently as Richard can, the concern of some of these municipalities is, how do we get competent people to serve on these advisory boards, which serve an important function, if you're going to apply the ethics code to them? And that's one of the things that Richard and I and the entire commission have been going back and forth on, and perhaps something that's going to be revisited when and if the commission decides to rewrite the ordinance.
To put it in context, how many of you remember the author Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People? Well, his son has written a book called The Speed of Trust. And one of the things that I think we have found is that right now, in terms of large institutions of any kind, there is very little trust. Whether it's big banks, whether it's government, private sector, public sector, there's very little trust. And his thesis is that when there is little trust, there's a layer of transaction that occurs to try and protect against things happening. And so I think what we have found, as a result of the lack of trust that we see today, that the pendulum has really swung. From laissez-faire before to we're going to make sure everybody behaves right now. At some point it will swing, we'll find the balance. But the reality is that until we restore trust for institutions and people feel, a restored faith in those institutions, we will see the level of transactions that we're seeing now, because people don't believe that the rest are going to act properly.
I'm wondering if there are any pieces of the puzzle when all this ethics apparatus was put in place, got left out. Just changes in certain laws that didn't happen, other committees that need to be formed to work on this and to keep the reform going and changing and evolving. I would ask either Cheryl or Marty or both.
I think from my perspective, when I go out and speak to the public, is that the citizens need to stay engaged. This is really about you. And you are the ones that make the difference. And if you don't think your vote matters, you are completely wrong. Because I look at Wellington. The citizens in Wellington, many of them, were very vocal about their feeling of their government there. And they made a change. Their vote made a change. And so what I see sometimes is where citizens get frustrated because there's just no open door for them, and the same people go to complain and sit at the commission meeting, and they're part of my citizens group, and it's frustrating because they're this small group. And if truly the citizens really understood the power of your ability to make and change this culture, this could change so much quicker. And so from my perspective, it's not putting another panel together, and more, it's about the citizens getting together and doing what they did in the beginning. Because at the end of the day, You know, because when it gets quiet, and we have all seen it, when it gets quiet and you all are not writing about the things that we're doing, what starts to happen? The government starts to go back to the old behavior. Not everybody, and I will tell you, there are some amazing government officials in this town, and there are some amazing cities, but then there are some that are not wanting this here. And so when we get quiet, they get active. And it's you, the people, that make the difference. I have seen it for the 2.5 years I've been here.
Which ones don't want to hear?
I think you all know, and you'll be seeing shortly.
Also, I think the ethos here, the whole culture, is changing. Like I said, every time you leave, somebody's a little bit smarter, a little bit ethically better. Everybody's, as Manny brought up, everybody's been trained, and we actually have state funding now to Palm Beach State College, and they have a Center for Applied Ethics, which has been funded by the state to move forward. That's why I think we're at ground zero. That's why I think everything that's happening is going to get better and better and better. Sure, it's hard when you create a system overnight. You had to hire people and get things going, had to get this all running in a short couple years, but we're doing very, very well. And the evolution is moving forward.
Talk about that center a little bit. What is their function? How do they work?
Well, they're actually in the process of forming a council, and they're looking at the community, and they actually have like a steering committee to bring it together and see what their actual role is going to be. They're reaching out into all segments of the community. They've reached out to the business, the government, and they're trying to see what's the role, and they have actually the funding to put this all together and put the icing on the cake.
Marty, I was asking about laws that need a little changing or adjusting. Is there any lobbying that needs to go on at the state level to make life easier down here for all the people who are trying to fight corruption?
Well, there's an issue at the state level, period. There is a new organization called Integrity Florida, which I am honored to sit on the board of. And their goal is essentially to replicate on the state level what we have done in Palm Beach County. There are, and we've seen this with, you've all been reading about digital domain. Well, there was a state legislator who pushed it through and then went on the board of digital domain. The fight, as Cheryl said, you know, it's up to us. It's not going to change in Tallahassee unless we all demand that it changes in Tallahassee. And you know, we were very fortunate in Palm Beach County. We had a perfect storm in some ways of things happening at various moments to push this forward. You know, the day that we launched our ethics pledge, and you know, we're hoping that we would get some attention, was the day that Mary McCarty got arrested. Well, all of a sudden, wow, you know, there's an ethics pledge. And the grand jury became the tipping point for activity. So a lot of things happened in Palm Beach County that really were the perfect storm for citizen action. But most of the grand jury report has been implemented. It you know, really did set a blueprint for action. And hopefully the current state attorney and whoever is elected next time will maintain the public integrity unit. And I think, you know, all of us need to, you know, if you see any of those three candidates, ask them whether they're going to maintain the public integrity unit, whether they're going to be supportive of the, you know, IG and Ethics Commission, and what their plans are. So if anything's going to happen at the state level, any other additional changes, as Cheryl said, it's really up to us.
If I can jump in real quick, one of the things that people don't recognize.
Anybody, if you have questions and you want to bring them forward, please pass them to the front or hand them to Michelle who's walking down the aisle. Sorry, go ahead.
People here, and this is not to say that we're done with ethics reform and the work we need to do, but people here in Palm Beach County don't recognize that the Palm Beach County ethics ordinance is tougher than the state ethics ordinance. Our opinions are tougher than the state opinions. The discussion about the legislator who just funded himself a job At the state level, we recently had that come before the Palm Beach County Ethics Commission, and we found that you can't do that here in Palm Beach County. Apparently you can in Tallahassee, but not here in Palm Beach County. So again, I want to second what Richard said. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination. And the biggest part of us not being done is that the community stays involved so that they can have the government that's responsive to them. It's not our job, it's your job as well to say, I want good government and I demand that you give me good government. But we are well along the way, well along the road to actually getting good government, good responsive government, good transparent government, well-functioning government that can actually make this a model for the state and perhaps even the country.
Well, in that regard, Palm Beach County received an award from the National Association of Counties for the Ethics Initiative. So what we have put in place received an award. So it's you know, we are, the compliance piece really is there, but we have to monitor it constantly to make sure that the support is there for the implementation of it.
A couple more comments, and I've got a big pile of questions here for you. Were you going to say something, Richard? Joe?
I have to say this. We have come a long way, but I will tell you we have also gone backwards. And from my perspective as the Inspector General in this county and from my counterparts, where when I first started people thought, wow, what a model, this is incredible. You know, the Inspector General reports to the people, and you know, they have 42 jurisdictions, but the reality is with the pushback for those that are doing it, it is hurting the ethics reform. And we have to acknowledge and recognize that if we're going to move forward, then we have to all get on the same page. And you know, if we can't get records and we can't interview people and we can't get our funding, the reality is we are not going forward. And for all the good that's happening and all the good government officials and cities that are doing an amazing job and have welcomed us, there is a handful out there that are causing us not to move forward. And it hurts us everywhere. It hurts us in this press locally. It hurts us nationally because everyone can Google us. And I have people from the federal government calling and saying, wow, not going too good here. And I'm feeling I have to defend this county a lot. And that's not where we should be, not 2.5 years into this. So I'm hopeful that we can move forward together and that we are really going to continue, because you know, we read about blind trust and we read about all these other books, and it tells you can sign an ethics pledge, but what does that mean? If you don't commit to it and you don't make a difference in your behavior and in your actions, it means nothing. So, you know, let's move this forward. I agree. And I hope that we can do that.
We have a lot of questions, and some of them are very difficult. So let's get to the first one. I guess, again, for Cheryl, someone wants you to discuss the Inspector General and Commission on Ethics jurisdiction over the county's constitutional officers.
We don't have jurisdiction over the constitutional officers, just the county and the municipalities. And like I said, we've signed agreements with other entities that voluntarily wanted to, but your sheriff, your school board, your tax collector, all of them, they do not fall under either of our jurisdictions.
Board of Election Supervisor?
None of them.
Okay.
Tax collector, none of them. Property appraiser,
Fall
they
under
would
the
have to
state.
voluntarily come under the jurisdiction.
Or they come under the state.
Or
for
if the
some
voters
reason,
vote for
right?
them.
Okay.
Or they, you know, right now they don't fall under the state either, but.
Here's one that names names. Let's get to that later. Let's see. How do we help the Inspector General do their job? If you see someone mugging your neighbor or a holdup, you know who to call and what to say. How do we as citizens and community groups know what to look for when we feel something's not right, when elected and city and county officials are the ones doing the mugging?
I have that answer.
The average citizen has very little knowledge of the process and how to take action.
We actually have, we just started last March, we have a citizens initiative group. In fact, a few of you have gone through our training that are in the audience. If you want to learn about, if you're interested in government and you go to council meetings or the commission meeting, we actually have a training for you on what is a regular agenda, what is a consent agenda, what does an RFP mean, a request for proposal, what's sunshine, what should they be doing, and how you can report to us when you think something might not be right. Sometimes it's helpful because what you think's not right really is okay, and then other times you report things to us where it's not okay. So call my office. It's on, we're on the website, but if you have a pen, it's 233-2350, and just say you want to be part of our Citizens Initiative. We'll get your information, and we're going to have a class hopefully by the end of October probably. Can you repeat the number? Absolutely. Just getting a pen here. It's 233-2350. Or just look on either the county website or just type in Palm Beach County Inspector General, and you'll get us.
And afterwards, by the way, you'll be free to come up and chat with our panelists if they don't mind. Here's an easy one. Who's Al Johnson? We just answered that. He's the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission, right? Okay. And how do citizens identify the lines so they can act and watch? The lines? I can't read handwriting. Let's see. There are times when elected officials vote on things that they have a financial interest in. When does it become an ethics violation?
Anytime.
When they vote.
Every time.
When they vote, that's.
And actually, we've had that issue come up even before they vote, when they participate in the discussions. And that was one of the things that we've managed to straighten out over the last couple of years. When you get a financial benefit and how you get a financial benefit. It's been one of our major areas of discussion over the last couple of years. The line is more gray than people realize, but at the end of the day, if your client or customer is coming before your board or your commission or your committee and you are an official under the ethics ordinance, you need to get off that dais and you need to leave the room. And you also need to file a Form 8B, which is the financial disclosure form for the state, period. End of discussion.
Maybe you could do a quick 25 words or less summary of what happened in Wellington recently.
We had someone who actually conducted a meeting in which it appeared that a client of this person was seeking a proposal from that particular committee. There, in the eyes of the commission, according to the settlement we reached, there was enough of a financial benefit where if there is any connection between your particular vote or your participation in the meeting, even if you don't vote, that's sufficient for there to be a conflict of interest. So that's where we ended up in the city of Wellington, in the village of Wellington, with that particular person. And financial benefit, we've gone round and round with that because there are some situations where it is a little difficult for you to determine whether you have a financial benefit. For instance, if you are a council person, and we'll pick the city of Green Acres, and you work for Chase Bank, and someone comes before you with a particular question, and it turns out that person is a customer of Chase Bank. Is that a conflict of interest? And Richard and I and the entire Commission on Ethics have gone through this, and it comes down to whether you knew or should have known that that was your particular customer. Obviously, if you're someone with a paltry bank account like myself, who have 2 daughters in college and a third one about ready to go, I probably don't get a lot of attention when I walk into the bank. But if you're T. Boone Pickens or Bill Koch and you walk in, that's a little different, because that financial benefit we found inures to you as a commissioner, and you can obviously do favors to that particular person. So anytime there's a financial benefit flowing to you, you need to step off the dais, is what it comes down to, and you need to not participate.
Here's another one. This is what I like about these ethical questions. Addressed to attorney. Is it ethical, and I'm sure this is just a hypothetical, Is it ethical to have 4 elected officials to campaign, endorse their chosen candidate, and have a fundraiser in their private homes to oust another elected councilman, as occurred in Boca Raton? Is that something that could come before your board about, or is that?
We get those all the time. And one of the things that I think we need to make sure everyone understands is that our name is the Commission on Ethics, but we don't regulate ethics. What we actually regulate is violations of an ordinance as to permitted conduct, which the voters of this county said we could do. There are some ethical questions that we just can't touch, and we're not going to touch, because we're not about morality. We're about violating the ethics code. And that comes down to certain things. Financial benefit. You can't use your position to financially benefit you or your family members, close relatives, things like that. Similarly situated, you can't use your position of power or authority or your government office in order to get special favors that others could not get. You can't lobby in certain situations if you're a government official. You can't put on a card seeking contributions for a charity, even though it may be a very, very good cause, that you are the mayor of town so-and-so, and will you please give me a donation? Those types of things are the things that you can't do. In terms of what is ethical, frankly, I think we could spend all night talking about that, and we probably couldn't all agree on the same thing. But violations of the ethics ordinance, the ethics code, definitely.
Okay.
And the other thing is, when you talk, there are election laws which are totally separate than the laws we're dealing with. And also, people are confused. There's the Sunshine Law, which no one here is involved with the Sunshine Law at all. That's a state law. But we all get the confusion of people saying, well, they violated this, and they think the Commission on Ethics does that. But like I said, every day people are getting a little bit smarter, a little bit more savvy to the way things work. But it's a very complicated system because of the levels.
Well, I guess the good thing is that, although it's not your official duty, informally, any one of you can forward people to the right person or
Certainly.
agency to talk to,
Sure.
especially in case of Sunshine Law allegations.
Rest assured, if there's a sunshine law, it's going to be looked at by the right
Yeah.
agency. We train on that all the time,
Right.
and we see it, and it's a problem.
Richard, here's a question for you, since you're a real estate person. Has corruption mainly been with real estate developers? Has there always been, here's another one, and because you've been here a long time, as we all have, I guess, has there always been corruption here, and people just now getting caught? Or were there plenty of earlier cases of corruption?
Well, I think and that's, when you look at the big picture, and I try to look at the big picture about this of where have we been and where are we going. And to answer the real estate question, when you go back to 2004, 5, and 6, when money was flowing here, and that's when the people that you mentioned were investigated, prosecuted, went to jail, been on parole, and they're out now. And times are different. But when we look at that time, there was real estate where everybody in this room had a friend who was a teacher, and they bought a $700,000 house, or a friend that, and you said, how did they do that? Well, they did that with a no-doc. It's called a no-doc loan, meaning no documentation. That doesn't mean you can lie your tail off. It just means they're not going to check the documentation. But when they filled that out, and all those people, all these houses that we have neighbors, and they filled that paperwork out, and they signed it, and they wrote a number in, and maybe the mortgage broker said, this is the number for the house, you got to make this much, or maybe the broker, whoever, but they signed that. They were the ones that signed that document and basically defrauded a federal loan institution. And that was happening in all of our neighborhoods all around here. So it was a different time, and I'm not justifying anything that happened, but there was a different culture at the time. And I think what's happening now is we're all getting smarter, we're all getting better, and we're all getting more ethical. And I think it has to reach out, actually, into some of the constitutional officers and the school board and some of the other places.
It's also the why do you rob a bank thing, because that's where the money is.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Cities, county government, as well as businesses are very fond of public-private partnerships, but it is precisely those types of arrangements that can be fraught with ethical issues. What can be done to minimize the opportunity for corruption there?
Why don't you start, Sharon? I'll finish that one off.
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly.
I could talk forever about that one. And the question is, because from my perspective, it starts here, and it ends up here, in the sense that the IG's office is very involved in anytime there's an expenditure of public funds.
Right. I mean, we're looking at it from the perspective of, did the transaction, was it clean? Did it follow the rules? Or is there some kind of conduct happening behind the scenes, and whether it goes into the ethics commission for that, or whether it stays from a law enforcement side of the house. As long as it's transparent, it follows the rules, there's nothing, it's a great thing to have public-private partnerships. That's what it's all about. But it's when the process gets tainted, and then people lose faith in that process is where we have our hiccups. But if it's, as long as it's transparent and there's no personal advantage, financial gain, then there's nothing wrong. It's a great thing.
A lot of times when you have those kind of business transactions, aren't there exemptions in the public, in the government and the sunshine laws that kind of keep that shielded more than ordinarily?
Well, the sunshine laws are getting a little bit better. They are a little weak, I will tell you. It's hard to prosecute on a sunshine law. And there are some more safeguards in place. It still needs work. But again, a lot of these things we find out when somebody reveals it. It's very difficult to find out otherwise. So someone has to observe the process and have what I call the courage to come forward and report.
And the process starts there, but it ends up here, because one of the things that we look at and we're focusing on, and keep in mind, you're talking to one person, it's a commission. There's 5 of us. We're completely independent of each other. We're appointed by different organizations in order to get diversity across the community in terms of practice areas, geography, everything. And we don't talk to each other in the sense that the sunshine law does apply to us. So if there's a former commissioner, I wouldn't even ride in the elevator with him in my same office building, just to make sure that we didn't get into that problem. But the point is that if there is financial benefit, we are going to examine that. And one of the things that the IG, the Inspector General, said, which is very, very important, that everybody needs to take away from this meeting, is that it's a question of transparency. The Inspector General can make sure that what happens is transparent. We on the Ethics Commission can force people, if they don't listen to her, to be transparent. But at the end of the day, it's up to the citizens themselves, the persons who have the vote, in order to make sure their government is responsive to them and transparent. Because there is no go to jail clause for not being transparent. But there is, if the citizens don't like that, get voted out of office clause for not being transparent. And as Richard said, there are a lot of really good folks in government. I don't want to give the impression everybody that's associated with government is bad, because one of the things I've learned in doing this for several years is that there are a lot of really dedicated people who don't make as much money as they probably should, who are in public service because they believe it's public service. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. But at the end of the day, they need to be responsive to yourselves, and it's your government, and you need to make sure that they understand that it's your government. And if they're not responsive to you in the fashion that you think is best, if you think the public-private partnership was a really dumb idea, then you need to exercise your discretion and your decision at the ballot box.
I should mention a bunch of the questions here all follow a similar line, and it's why isn't this one being investigated, and why isn't that one being investigated? One names names, which is nice. I can pass that along. But
Al Johnson's number is 233-02.
Here's one. I mean, I can tell you, what will it take to get the county inspector general into the school district of Palm Beach County?
Well, I will tell you, it's probably too late, because they just signed a 4-year contract with their internal auditor to become the inspector general. So they've already created their own.
So somebody's watching. They're ready. Okay. And another one, similar question about the sheriff's office. Again, I think we talked about that. And have one here about Riviera Beach, complaining about corruption and unsolved crimes in Riviera Beach and police corruption. Why can't the RICO law be applied to dismantle the corruption in Riviera Beach? Why can't the sheriff's department take over? Nepotism of officers. Who wants to handle that?
That would go to the state attorney's office.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's clearly in the,
And if you looked on the website, we're busy in Riviera, but so is I mean, it's. But I'll tell you, they've been very cooperative. I will tell you, Riviera has been very. They weren't initially, but they have been very cooperative, and they have. We kind of kid and say we're going to put a train stop right there for them. But the council has been in our office, and some of the city employees, and they've been very cooperative.
and I can tell you what you hear. When you ask the state attorney, what are you guys doing about corruption? It's usually the first thing they'll say is, well, we have a lot of cases involving police officers.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that they say they don't avoid. But again, the community, someone in the community who knows something has to go up and either tell a reporter or tell the state
us know.
attorney.
Or let us know, and we'll get it to them.
'Cause you
Let
can't
us
assume
let
that
us
they have
know.
ears everywhere.
It's, the county is how many, 1.3, 1.4 million, Tony? And between all the different contracts that are let and the budgets between the county government and the municipalities and the different governmental units, Cheryl said it a moment ago, it may have not hit home, but that is $10 billion, with a B, dollars. You could pay us, and by the way, we don't get paid, but you could form an organization of 2,000 people, and we're still not going to be able to cover everyone. So we're here to help, but you got to help us, and you got to tell us if you see something that isn't right. You file a report with Cheryl, file a report with the Ethics Commission. Come up to me, come up to Richard, come up to Marty. You got to participate, because there's just no way that we can cover the entire county. A county this big. This is the biggest county east of the Mississippi geographically. And it's as diverse as you can get. Someone tells me that Belle Glade is the same as Palm Beach in terms of diversity. Well, you haven't been living in this county very long.
One of the things, too, on filing a complaint, with the Ethics Commission, you do have to have direct testimony, so you have to swear it in. But in our office, we have a hotline, and although we hope that you would leave your name so we can call you back or some kind of information, because a lot of times you don't leave us enough, and so we're looking for a needle in a haystack, and that's kind of difficult. But you can leave us a message without a name and tell us what's going on and be as specific as you can. So you don't have to swear into it. You can just leave it on the recorder or call in and say, I prefer my name not being known right now, or try to give us some kind of contact information where we can contact you. There's a lot of fear, especially with the employees. There's a lot of fear for retaliation, and we've got to overcome that. And little by little, we're starting to see employees start to come forward and like I say, have the courage to start reporting.
Cheryl, when you were given a contract, then told you have to wait on a bid, how does that happen? I was given a county contract, then told I had to wait until they put the bid out. What is the procedure for obtaining a contract?
Oh, you need to call me. Or you see that? See Joe in the back? Wave your hand, Joe. That person needs to go see Joe. He oversees the contract oversight unit. We want to know about that one. Not that you'll be in trouble, but we need to understand what happened.
Where do we find a copy of the ethics code? Online somewhere?
It is.
Okay.
It's on the county website. It's also at palmbeachcountyethics.com. And we actually have little pamphlets that we've printed up, and we'll be happy to give you one of those. It's very exciting reading.
Here you go. Well, attorneys are about as loved as journalists. So. Self-policing stinks. Any jurisdiction over attorneys? So, if they mean the Florida bar isn't doing its thing, I guess the state attorney's office. They are all attorneys. Anybody want to touch that one? Anyone not an attorney want to touch that?
As Tony mentioned at the start of the discussion. I have testified on behalf of the Florida Bar against attorneys in disciplinary matters. So if you are serious that there's been an ethical violation by an attorney, I do want to know about it, and I can point you toward the right person and organizations, all kidding aside. And it's not the Florida Bar that regulates attorneys like most people think. It's the Florida Supreme Court, and they are no longer attorneys, they're now justices. So they don't actually see things the same way we as attorneys do. So if you think that you get special treatment because an attorney looking after another attorney, it's, if anything, as Cheryl will tell you and as police officers will tell you, the people who come from that same profession are toughest on people in their own profession when they sit in judgment on them. And the Florida Supreme Court is not very easy on attorneys.